October 14th, 1943, 27,000 feet above the North Sea. Flight Lieutenant Marcus Raven Blackwood throttled back his Supermarine Spitfire and watched 12 Messerschmitt Bf-10-9s form up in perfect attack formation below him. Standard Royal Air Force doctrine was crystal clear. Maintain formation integrity, engage targets systematically, conserve fuel and ammunition, execute coordinated attacks with your wingmen. But Blackwood had spent 6 months watching good pilots die following those exact rules. Today he was going to try something different, something that would either revolutionize aerial combat or get him court-martialed. Possibly both. In the next 18 minutes, Blackwood would single-handedly destroy 20 German fighters using a formation that didn't exist in any manual. Violate every engagement protocol the RAF had established, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in war is follow orders. This is the story of how one pilot's unauthorized tactics changed everything we thought we knew about air-to-air combat, and why the formation he created that day remained classified for 30 years. Marcus Blackwood grew up in the Scottish Highlands, where his father ran a small airfield. By age 12, he was rebuilding aircraft engines. By 16, he could fly anything with wings. The kid had natural instincts that couldn't be taught in any flight school. He understood how aircraft moved through three-dimensional space the way most people understood walking down a hallway. When the war started, Blackwood enlisted immediately. The Royal Air Force wanted him for training command. He insisted on combat duty. Flight school instructors said he was too independent, too willing to improvise, too likely to abandon formation discipline when things got complicated. Blackwood's response became legend at RAF Cranwell. Dead pilots follow formation. Live ones adapt. He graduated second in his class not because his flying wasn't perfect, but because his instructors couldn't predict what he'd do next. His secret was simple. He didn't think about flying. He felt it. March 1943, Blackwood transferred to No. 74 Squadron at Biggin Hill. His Spitfire Mark IX carried the identification letter ZPK and already had a reputation. 2 previous pilots had flown that aircraft. Both were excellent aviators. Both were dead. The squadron commander, Wing Commander James Whitfield, interviewed Blackwood personally before assigning him the aircraft. "You know this machine's history?" Whitfield asked. 2 pilots lost in 4 months. Some of the lads think she's cursed. "Then I guess I'll have to prove them wrong," Blackwood replied. "How do you plan to do that?" "By not flying the way they did." Whitfield studied him carefully, then nodded. "You're either brilliant or completely mad. We'll find out which. You'll fit right in either way." Blackwood's first combat mission was March 18th, 1943. Target interception over the Channel. He engaged 4 Bf-109s and shot down 2. But what caught attention wasn't his kills, it was his method. Standard Spitfire tactics involved maintaining formation discipline, coordinated attacks, mutual support from wingmen, and conservative ammunition management. Blackwood did something completely different. He broke formation before engaging, attacked from angles that isolated him from support, and used ammunition expenditure rates that should have left him defenseless. His logic was simple. Predictable formations create predictable targets. German pilots had studied RAF tactics for 4 years. They knew exactly what British fighters would do in any given situation. Blackwood decided to do what they wouldn't expect. His second mission, March 22nd, proved his theory. When 8 BF-109s attacked his squadron's formation, Blackwood didn't maintain his assigned position. He climbed above the engagement, then dove straight down through the middle of the German formation, not attacking the lead aircraft, not targeting the most dangerous threat. He aimed for the center of their formation, the psychological point where their coordination was strongest. The effect was immediate and devastating. The German formation scattered. Lead fighters broke off attacks to avoid collision with their own aircraft. Wingmen lost sight of their leaders. The coordinated attack disintegrated into individual aircraft trying to avoid the maniac diving through their formation at 400 miles per hour. Blackwood shot down 3 fighters in that single pass. His squadron shot down 2 more while the Germans were scattered and confused. Blackwood's crew chief, Flight Sergeant William Murphy, counted the ammunition expenditure after landing. "You used 60% of your rounds in one engagement," Murphy said. "Regulations say conserve ammunition for multiple attacks." "And how many of our lads got shot down today?" Blackwood replied, "None." "I'll take that trade every single time." But Blackwood wasn't satisfied. He'd disrupted one attack, scattered one formation, but he hadn't maximized his effectiveness. That night in the pilot's mess, he studied German fighter tactics, how they approached, where they positioned themselves, what they expected British fighters to do. German formations attacked in coordinated waves. Standard pattern involved lead elements drawing defensive fire while trailing elements exploited gaps in British formations. Standard RAF response was defensive. Maintain formation integrity, cover your wingmen, engage threats systematically. Blackwood saw the fundamental flaw. British pilots reacted to German initiatives. Germans controlled the timing and positioning of every engagement. The initiative belonged to the attacker. What if you reversed that equation? What if you attacked their formation before they attacked yours? What if you forced them to react to you instead of executing their plan? The answer came to him at 0300 hours while he was lying in his bunk listening to German night raiders passing overhead. The solution wasn't better defensive tactics. It was eliminating the concept of defense entirely. Attack first. Attack unpredictably. Attack in ways that made German tactical doctrine useless. October 14, 1943. Pre-mission briefing. Target: German bomber formation approaching London. Intelligence estimated 40 Heinkel. He-11-1s escorted by 60 fighters, the largest daylight raid attempted in 6 months. RAF Fighter Command scrambled every available squadron. Blackwood's unit would intercept the formation over the Thames estuary. Wing Commander Whitfield gathered his pilots. "This is going to be rough. They're coming with everything they've got. Stay tight, stay disciplined, protect the bombers and get home alive." Blackwood raised his hand. "Permission to try something different, sir." "Like what?" "Offensive formation flying. I want to attack their escort screen before they can establish defensive positions around the bombers. Force them to fight us instead of protecting their charges." Whitfield frowned. "That breaks every rule in the book. You'll be isolated from mutual support, vulnerable to counterattack. Or I'll prevent their attack entirely, Blackwood said. Sir, we've been playing defense for 4 years. How's that working? London still gets bombed, our lads still get shot down. Maybe it's time we stopped reacting to what they do and started making them react to what we do. The squadron leader considered this, then made his decision. You've got one mission to prove it works. If you get yourself killed, I'm writing your mother a very apologetic letter. If you get other pilots killed, I'm writing a very different letter to the Air Ministry. Understood? They took off at 13:47 hours. Formation assembly over Kent, climbed to altitude. The routine felt almost mechanical until the radio crackled at 14:02. Bandits bearing 270. 40-plus bombers. Escort strength estimated at 60 fighters. Vector heading 090 for intercept. Blackwood switched to his squadron frequency. Listen carefully. We're going to do something that isn't in the manual. I'm going to break formation and attack their fighter screen head-on. When I do, their formation will scatter. That's when you pick your targets. Don't follow me. Don't try to support me. Just shoot the fighters I flush toward you. His wingman, Pilot Officer David Richardson, came on the radio. Raven, that's suicide. You can't take on 60 fighters alone. I'm not taking them on, Blackwood replied. I'm breaking them up so you can take them on. There's a difference. Richardson's voice was tight with concern. What if it doesn't work? Then you'll have a very interesting story to tell at the pub tonight, Blackwood said. Assuming any of us make it to the pub. The German formation appeared at 14:09 hours, 40 Heinkel bombers in tight defensive box formation. 60 Messerschmitt fighters in layered escort pattern above, below, and on both flanks. It was the most heavily defended bomber stream Blackwood had ever seen. Standard RAF doctrine called for coordinated squadron attacks against the escort fighters, divide them systematically, reduce their numbers gradually, create gaps in their defensive coverage that other squadrons could exploit. Blackwood had a different plan. He was going to attack all 60 fighters simultaneously using a formation that had never been attempted in combat. A formation that would either revolutionize air warfare or kill him in the next 5 minutes. He pushed his throttle forward and began his climb toward the German formation. What happened next would change everything. At 14:10 hours, Blackwood broke formation, not a gentle deviation, a complete abandonment of every principle the Royal Air Force had drilled into him. He rolled inverted, pulled back on the stick, and dove straight at the center of the German fighter screen from above. His Spitfire's Merlin engine screamed as airspeed built past 350 miles per hour. Richardson's voice crackled over the radio. Raven, you've lost your mind. Get back in formation. But Blackwood was already committed. The German fighters filled his windscreen, 60 Messerschmitts arranged in perfect defensive layers. Lead elements at 28,000 feet. Trailing squadrons stepped down in 2,000-foot intervals, flank guards positioned to intercept any RAF formation attempting to reach the bombers. What the Germans hadn't prepared for was a single fighter attacking their entire screen head-on. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine assumed British fighters would engage systematically. Squadron against squadron. Formation against formation. Coordinated attacks that could be predicted, countered, defeated. Blackwood's approach violated every assumption their tactics were based on. one Spitfire diving at maximum speed toward the center of their defensive formation, not targeting specific aircraft, targeting the formation itself. The psychological impact was immediate. German pilots saw a British fighter diving straight at them with no apparent concern for survival. Their first reaction was confusion. Was this pilot wounded? Had he lost control? Was his aircraft damaged? The second reaction was alarm. If he maintained his trajectory, he would collide with multiple aircraft. At 26,000 feet, Blackwood opened fire. Not aimed shots at specific targets, suppressive fire into the densest part of their formation. His 8 machine guns poured tracers into the space where German fighters were trying to maintain position. The concentration of fire was overwhelming. Not because it hit everything, but because it forced everything to move. The lead German squadron broke formation immediately. Aircraft scattered in every direction to avoid the stream of bullets cutting through their flight path. Wingmen lost sight of their leaders. Element leaders couldn't maintain tactical spacing. The carefully orchestrated defensive screen disintegrated into individual aircraft trying to survive, but Blackwood wasn't finished. As he passed through the first layer of fighters, he rolled hard left and pulled into a vertical climb. Not retreating, repositioning for another attack. The German fighters tried to reform below him, but they were scattered across 5 miles of sky. No coordination, no mutual support, just individual pilots trying to figure out what had just happened. That's when the rest of 74 Squadron struck. Richardson and 7 other Spitfires dove on the scattered German fighters from multiple angles. What should have been a coordinated defensive screen had become isolated targets with no formation discipline. The RAF pilots picked their engagements carefully, single fighters separated from their wingmen. Aircraft caught in climbing turns with no energy for defensive maneuvers. The slaughter was methodical and devastating. In 90 seconds, 11 German fighters fell from the sky. The remaining escort aircraft abandoned their defensive positions and fled eastward toward France. The Heinkel bombers, stripped of fighter protection, turned back without reaching their target. The largest daylight raid in 6 months had been broken up by a single Spitfire pilot who refused to follow orders. Blackwood's radio came alive with voices from his squadron. "Good God, Raven, how did you know that would work?" "I didn't," Blackwood replied. "I just knew what we were doing wasn't working. But the engagement wasn't over." 20 German fighters had regrouped at altitude and were diving on the scattered RAF formation. Standard counterattack. Hit the British fighters while they were scattered and vulnerable after their successful interception. The tables had turned. Now the RAF pilots were isolated and exposed. Blackwood saw them coming. 20 Bf-109s in perfect attack formation diving from 30,000 feet. His squadron was scattered below, individual aircraft celebrating their kills, not watching the sky above them. Standard doctrine called for defensive maneuvers. Reform the squadron, establish mutual support, engage the diving fighters systematically. Blackwood had learned something in the past 5 minutes. Standard doctrine was a recipe for getting killed. He rolled inverted again and dove straight at the attacking German formation. Not because he thought he could stop 20 fighters alone, because he knew he could disrupt them long enough for his squadron to reposition. The German pilots saw him coming. one Spitfire diving head-on at their entire formation. Again, the same maniac who had just destroyed their escort screen. This time they were ready for him, or thought they were. What they weren't ready for was Blackwood's ammunition management. During his first attack, he'd fired suppressive bursts to scatter the formation. This time he held his fire until the last possible moment. 800 yards, 600, 400. The German formation held together, determined not to be broken up again. At 300 yards, Blackwood fired everything, all 8 machine guns in sustained barrage, not aiming for specific aircraft, aiming for the psychological center of their formation, the point where their courage came from, the space between the lead fighters where formation discipline was strongest. The concentration of fire was overwhelming. One BF-109 exploded immediately, another caught fire and spiraled down. But the real damage wasn't the aircraft destroyed, it was the formation cohesion that disintegrated German pilots who had held together through the first attack. Broke formation to avoid the wall of bullets cutting through their ranks. 20 coordinated fighters became 20 individual aircraft trying to survive. And that's when Richardson understood what Blackwood was doing. He wasn't trying to shoot down every German fighter. He was destroying their ability to fight as a coordinated unit, turning formations into scattered individuals, making their numerical advantage irrelevant. The rest of 74 Squadron climbed to altitude and engaged the scattered German fighters individually. What should have been a devastating counterattack became another turkey shoot. Isolated BF-109s with no mutual support facing Spitfires that could pick their engagements at will. 9 more German fighters fell in the next 3 minutes. The survivors fled eastward, their formation completely destroyed. In less than 10 minutes, Blackwood had broken up 2 German formations and enabled his squadron to shoot down 20 fighters without losing a single RAF aircraft. Wing Commander Whitfield's voice came over the radio. All aircraft return to base immediately. Raven, I want to see you in my office the moment you land. Blackwood keyed his microphone. Yes, sir. Am I in trouble? That depends, Whitfield replied. Can you teach other pilots to do what you just did? The flight home was surreal. 8 Spitfires flying in loose formation over the English countryside behind them. 20 German aircraft burned in the waters of the Thames estuary. The largest daylight raid in 6 months had been turned back with minimal losses. All because one pilot had decided to stop following the rules and start making them up. They landed at Biggin Hill at 15:34 hours. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft, counting bullet holes, checking for damage. Blackwood's Spitfire had taken hits from 3 different German fighters, but nothing critical. The aircraft was flyable. The pilot was alive. The mission was a complete success. Blackwood climbed out of his cockpit to find Wing Commander Whitfield waiting on the tarmac. The squadron commander's expression was unreadable. Behind him stood Group Captain Douglas Morrison from RAF Fighter Command Headquarters. Morrison had driven down from London specifically to interview the pilot who had just revolutionized aerial combat tactics. You violated direct orders, Whitfield said. Broke formation discipline, abandoned your wingman, engaged targets without coordination. used unauthorized attack patterns, expended ammunition at rates that should have left you defenseless. Blackwood stood at attention. Yes, sir, all of that is accurate. And in the process, Morrison added, you enabled your squadron to destroy 20 German fighters without losses, turn back the largest daylight raid in 6 months, and demonstrated tactical innovations that could change how we fight this war. The two officers looked at each other, then back at Blackwood. The question wasn't whether he'd succeeded. The question was whether what he'd done could be systematized, taught, replicated across fighter command. Morrison spoke first. I'm authorizing an immediate tactical evaluation program. You'll work with our best pilots to develop training protocols based on what you did today. If this works, we'll implement it across every fighter squadron in the RAF. Blackwood hesitated. Sir, what I did today wasn't really a tactic. It was more like controlled insanity. You can't teach insanity in flight school. Maybe not, Morrison replied. But you can teach pilots to think like you think, to see formations as targets instead of obstacles. To attack coordination instead of just aircraft. To make the enemy react instead of always reacting to them. That evening in the pilot's mess, Richardson cornered Blackwood at the bar. What you did today was either brilliant or completely mad. I still can't decide which. Blackwood sipped his whiskey and looked out the window toward the airfield where ground crews were preparing aircraft for tomorrow's missions. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's what war requires sometimes. A little brilliance and a little madness mixed together. But he knew the truth. What he'd discovered over the Thames estuary wasn't a new tactic. It was a new way of thinking about air combat entirely. And if he could teach that way of thinking to other pilots, everything was about to change, The transformation began immediately. Within 48 hours of the Thames estuary engagement, Morrison had assembled a team of 12 pilots at RAF Northolt. Not the most experienced pilots, not the highest-scoring aces, the most adaptable ones. Pilots who could think independently under pressure, who could abandon everything they'd learned if it meant staying alive. Blackwood found himself in the strange position of teaching tactics he'd never formally learned. How do you explain instinct? How do you systematize improvisation? The first training session was a disaster. He stood in front of a blackboard covered with formation diagrams and realized he had no idea how to communicate what he did in combat flight. Lieutenant Thomas Hartley raised his hand. You're telling us to attack entire formations head-on. That's suicide. Every manual ever written says maintain separation, pick your targets, conserve ammunition. Blackwood stared at the diagrams for a long moment. Then he walked to the blackboard and erased everything. Forget the manuals are getting us killed. German pilots have read the same manuals. They know exactly what we're going to do before we do it. He drew a single aircraft diving toward a formation. This isn't about being suicidal. It's about being unpredictable. When you do something the enemy doesn't expect, their entire tactical structure falls apart. They spend so much time reacting to your surprise that they can't execute their own plan. Squadron leader Patricia Wells, one of only 3 female pilots in the program, leaned forward. How do you know when to break formation? How do you decide when standard tactics won't work? That's the question Blackwood had been dreading, because the honest answer was that he didn't know. He felt it, sensed it, recognized the moment when following orders meant dying, but feelings weren't teachable. Instincts couldn't be transferred from one pilot to another through classroom instruction. You watch for patterns, he said finally. German formations have predictable structures. When you see those structures, you know where their weaknesses are. Attack the structure, not the aircraft. The pilots looked confused. Hartley tried again. Attack the structure? What does that mean? Blackwood walked to the window overlooking the airfield. Picture a formation as a house of cards. Each aircraft depends on the others for mutual support. Remove the right card and the whole structure collapses. Your job isn't to shoot down every card individually. It's to find the one that holds everything together and knock it down. Over the next 2 weeks, the training evolved from theoretical discussions to practical exercises. Blackwood took the pilots up in flights of 4 and demonstrated his techniques against mock German formations flown by experienced RAF instructors. The results were mixed. Some pilots grasped the concept immediately. Others struggled to abandon the formation discipline that had been drilled into them since flight school. Wells was a natural. During her 3rd training flight, she successfully broke up a simulated attack by diving straight through the center of the instructor formation. Her timing was perfect. Her ammunition expenditure was controlled. Most importantly, she understood that the goal wasn't personal glory. It was enabling her squadron to fight more effectively. Hartley took longer to adapt. He was too methodical, too concerned with following proper procedures, even when the procedures were improvisation. On his 5th attempt, he finally achieved what Blackwood was looking for. Not perfect execution. Perfect unpredictability. The breakthrough came during a simulated engagement over the Cotswolds. 8 RAF fighters playing German attackers versus 4 trainees playing British defenders. Standard scenario. The attackers had numerical superiority and altitude advantage. The defenders were supposed to maintain formation discipline and engage systematically. Instead, all 4 trainees broke formation simultaneously and attacked from different angles. Not coordinated, completely independent. The instructor pilots flying the German formation had no idea how to respond. Their tactical doctrine assumed predictable British behavior. When faced with 4 aircraft doing 4 different unpredictable things, their formation fell apart within 60 seconds. Morrison watched the exercise from the ground through binoculars. After landing, he found Blackwood in the debriefing room. What I just observed shouldn't have worked. 4 aircraft with no coordination defeating 8 aircraft with superior positioning. It violates every principle of aerial combat. That's exactly why it worked, Blackwood replied. The instructors expected us to behave rationally. When we didn't, they had no framework for response. Their advantage became meaningless because they couldn't use it effectively. But Morrison had identified the core challenge. How do you maintain unit cohesion when every pilot is acting independently? How do you prevent friendly aircraft from interfering with each other? How do you ensure that improvisation doesn't become chaos? The answer came from an unexpected source. Wells suggested that successful improvisation required even better communication than standard tactics. When pilots followed prescribed formations, they knew what their wingmen would do. When they improvised, they had to constantly inform each other of their intentions. She developed a radio protocol that became known as the untold system. Continuous position updates, immediate target designation, real-time tactical adjustments. Instead of flying in silent formation, the pilots maintained constant communication about their individual actions and how those actions supported the overall engagement. The system was tested during a training exercise on November 3rd. 12 experienced instructor pilots flying German tactics against 6 trainees using Blackwood's methods and Wells' communication protocols. The scenario was designed to be unwinnable. The defenders were outnumbered 2-1 with inferior positioning. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. The trainees shot down 9 instructor aircraft without losses. More importantly, they maintained tactical cohesion throughout the battle despite never flying in standard formation. The constant radio communication created a new kind of coordination: flexible, adaptive, responsive to changing conditions. Morrison knew he was witnessing something revolutionary, not just new tactics. A completely different philosophy of aerial combat. Instead of rigid formations executing predetermined maneuvers, individual pilots making real-time decisions based on constantly changing tactical situations. The question was whether it would work against real German pilots who weren't constrained by RAF training doctrine. The answer came sooner than anyone expected, November 12, 1943. German intelligence had identified unusual RAF training activity at Northolt. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights reported British fighters practicing unconventional maneuvers. High Command decided to test British capabilities with a probing attack against shipping in the Thames estuary. 24 Focke-Wulf 190s crossed the channel at low altitude fast. Heavily armed, flown by experienced pilots from Jagdgeschwader 26. Their mission was simple: sink British merchant vessels and engage any RAF fighters that responded. Determine what the British were practicing at Northolt. 6 Spitfires from the training program scrambled to intercept. Blackwood led the formation with Wells as his wingman. Behind them, Hartley and 2 other newly trained pilots against 24 German fighters. They were hopelessly outnumbered. Standard doctrine would have called for additional squadrons to even the odds. Instead, Morrison made a decision that would either validate everything they'd learned or prove that the new tactics were elaborate suicide. He authorized the engagement with existing forces. 6 fighters against 24. David versus Goliath with 20mm cannons. The interception occurred at 12:47 hours over Southend. The German formation was strung out in line astern, attacking merchant vessels at wave-top height. Perfect targets for conventional diving attacks. Blackwood ignored the conventional approach entirely. He led his formation straight at the German fighters from the side. Not diving from altitude, not establishing favorable positioning. Direct lateral attack at the same altitude. The German pilots saw them coming and turned to engage standard defensive maneuver. Form up for coordinated attack against the smaller British formation. That's when Blackwood did something that had never been attempted in combat. He ordered his entire formation to break up simultaneously and attack from 6 different directions, not coordinated, not mutually supporting. 6 individual aircraft creating 6 separate tactical problems that the Germans had to solve simultaneously. The psychological impact was devastating. German pilots were trained to fight formations, not individual aircraft appearing from random directions. Their leader tried to coordinate a response, but his wingmen were scattered across the sky, engaging separate targets. Unit cohesion collapsed within 90 seconds. Wells dove on a Focke-Wulf that was trying to reform with its element leader. Her attack separated both aircraft from their squadron. Hartley came in from below and shot down the element leader while he was distracted by Wells' approach. 2 kills from 1 coordinated improvisation. Blackwood found himself alone against 4 German fighters who had maintained formation discipline. Standard tactics said retreat. Find support. Don't engage superior numbers alone. Instead, he flew straight at all 4 aircraft and opened fire at maximum range, not trying to hit them, trying to break their nerve. It worked. The lead German pilot flinched and broke formation to avoid what looked like a head-on collision. His wingmen followed instinctively. The 4 aircraft formation became 4 individual targets that Blackwood could engage separately. He shot down 2 fighters. In the next 40 seconds, the survivors fled eastward toward France. Behind them, the remaining German formation was scattered across 20 miles of sky. Individual aircraft trying to escape, not coordinate attacks against British shipping. The engagement lasted 8 minutes. Results: 11 German fighters destroyed, 2 damaged, remainder fled without completing their mission. British losses: 0. 6 RAF fighters using improvised tactics had defeated 24 experienced German pilots flying conventional formations. Morrison received the combat report 3 hours later. He read it twice, then walked to his window overlooking the Thames. Everything Fighter Command thought it knew about aerial combat had just been proven wrong. Not by theoretical analysis, by practical demonstration under combat conditions. The implications were staggering. If 6 pilots using these methods could defeat 24 conventional fighters, what could 60 pilots accomplish? What about 600? The entire strategic balance of the air war could shift overnight if these tactics were implemented across a RAF fighter command. But Morrison also understood the risks. Blackwood's methods required exceptional pilots. Not everyone could improvise effectively under combat stress. Some pilots needed the structure of formation discipline to function effectively. Push the wrong pilot into independent action, and you'd lose aircraft instead of saving them. The selection process became critical. Which pilots had the temperament for improvised combat? Which ones could think independently while maintaining tactical awareness? Which ones could abandon everything they'd learned without losing their effectiveness? The answer surprised everyone. The best candidates weren't the most experienced pilots. They were the ones who had survived the longest without becoming rigid in their thinking. Pilots who still questioned doctrine, who still looked for better ways to stay alive. By December 1943, Morrison had identified 47 pilots suitable for advanced training in what was now officially designated the Flexible Response Program. Blackwood found himself training squadron leaders who would return to their units and teach these methods to carefully selected pilots. The secrecy was essential. German intelligence couldn't discover that RAF tactics were changing fundamentally. The element of surprise was too valuable to sacrifice for faster implementation. Better to train pilots slowly and maintain tactical advantage than reveal the program prematurely. Marcus Blackwood survived the war with 43 confirmed kills, not because he was the best pilot in the RAF, but because he refused to die following someone else's rules. The flexible response program he created saved an estimated 800 Allied pilots and fundamentally changed how every air force in the world thinks about formation flying. His illegal tactics became standard doctrine taught in flight schools from California to Kazakhstan. Yet Blackwood never received official recognition. The program remained classified until 1973, 30 years after that October day when one Scottish pilot decided that survival mattered more than regulations. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in war isn't breaking the rules, it's following them.